and welcome to Relocate Guru, the platform to help you feel like a local before you move and make the moving easier no matter where you go to. Today I'm joined with Jennifer, who's got 25 years as a financial planner. She's from the US but now lives in Bermuda with her husband, who's from Bermuda, so she was a love expat, and has written a best-selling book called Financial Planning for Global Living. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So tell us a little bit more about what started you on your journey and why you went into financial planning and ended up in Bermuda.
Yeah, sure. Love to. So I'll try to make it really succinct because it is literally my entire life at this point. So it's interesting. I started out actually as an accounting major, and I'll tell you what, I honestly don't know why, other than I knew I was always fascinated with money, but not in the tangible sense. It was more like that there was this almost like I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was like a function, if that makes sense, or it was something that just was around, but I didn't understand it. And so I thought, well, I remember being, 16 or 17 and thinking, oh, I have to choose a career and I have to go to college and I don't know what to do. So I remember looking around, metaphorically at the professionals that I knew, and they all seemed to be CPAs. Don't ask me why, I don't know. Because my grandfather was an optometrist and yet my other grandfather was a farmer. So I do not know. I had quite an interesting upbringing. But anyway, the point is I started in college as an accounting major thinking this could be fun. And then I realized that no disrespect to any accountants out there, but that is just not me. And I just figured I just couldn't sit there and do that for the rest of my life. So I switched to finance. And then I remember I spent summers working for a bank part-time. Luckily, I was able to, not as a teller or anything like that, I got through the back end, through the operations department. And so I remember talking to one of the senior vice presidents, and he said, if you can get through, he handed me a course catalog, and he said, if you can get through the first level of this curriculum, you'll be doing better than me. And I remember I read it, and it was this thing called financial planning. And one of the things about accounting that I didn't like was the fact that I wasn't really dealing with people. And that became one of the big things for me and why I switched to finance. And that was the idea of financial planning. It was like I could demystify money and the forces of money, but I could deal with people, and we could really do good, but we could also, it's just much more exciting to me, like creating things. And I just love seeing the creation or the reality of a vision come together, and that we can put tactical and strategic steps in place to get there. So that's kind of how I fell into financial planning. Now, while I was in university, I met this international student who is now my husband, and then he dragged me off to Bermuda. But seriously, like I remember that was kind of like the first choice or the first challenge that we even have in the what I call the cross-border lifestyle, was deciding at 21, after graduating from university, where I had a really good job offer, I want to say, whether I was going to take that career, which required a 2-year commitment on my part, or whether I was going to, at 21 or 22 at the time, get married and move to a different country and then start. And I knew nothing about that country other than from a couple of visits, while we were dating. So that was my beginning really into this entire subject matter of, what is it like to be, yes, I'm a love pat, but at the same time, I definitely struggled personally with trying to figure out where I fit in. I was like, I don't really fit in with the expats. I don't really fit in with the locals. And then on the money part, I was training as a financial planner, but financial planners are not taught the international aspects of the rules. Financial planners, it's country-specific knowledge. And so there is no curriculum, even today, that teaches how to know how to transition between the rules of one or two or more countries, and just how to actually do it. So I literally spent the beginning part of my career figuring this out for myself, and for clients, because I was able to stay in my passion, even relocating to Bermuda. We had to start in investing, but then I broke away from the brokerage firm to create an independent advisory firm. And then since then, we've been building the curriculum out. So it's kind of a longer story. That's my short version. But the key point is that, it can be overwhelming. But I've done as much as I can in my entire career to try to boil things down to the critical steps, because I've personally done a lot of the long way around to get to things. We've worked with clients where we thought, oh, yay, we found a sort of shortcut. And we've done this all really the hard way. So it's a pleasure to be here to try to shortcut that for your community.
I just want to pause there for a sec, because if you guys are watching, I definitely want to get your questions and any experiences that you've had. So pop them in the comments below so Jennifer can answer them for you. So if you're having any questions about what you need to do with your finances, or you're just confused, sort of like, please pop them in the comments, because Jennifer's got so much experience, but everyone's got such varied circumstances.
Yeah.
So join in the conversation about with your stories. We'd love to hear from you. And I was reading one post about somebody who moved to Spain and sort of like to teach English, and she became married and sort of like was working in the same language school as her husband, and that threw up a whole issue with being working in your husband's business became like autonomo. I think it was autonomo or something like that, where it's like the tax rules made it really not good for you to work under those circumstances. And so like the tax rules and things can have a huge impact on your financial independence, like your spouse as well. Which
in fact, tax, I was talking about the essentials. Tax really is, just to kind of summarize it, the essentials really are what in my sort of framework, we call it the tax filter. And then the second one would be what I call cash design. And then the third one would be what I call protect the plan, which I can talk about in a little bit in more detail. Starting with tax filter.
Again, so you got first is the
tax filter, and then cash design, and then protect the plan. So these would be the three what I call the essentials. If you have to worry about anything, and it's kind of in that order, really. So what I'm talking about here in the tax filters is you led right into it, because tax is a matter of fact, okay? So the nice thing about fact is you can, again, if you're planning and we're being deliberate about what we want, we can set up facts to actually be what we need them to be. That's the point of planning. I think a lot of people sometimes misunderstand, and they think, oh, it's tax prep time. I need to prepare my tax return. So now what do I need to do? It's like, well, it is too late because the year has already closed, or the time period, whatever the time period that you're filing for has closed. The facts are what they are. You can't change them after they've happened, but you can influence how a tax return is going to look by knowing the rules and understanding big picture. And again, so how do you do that? Well, because you have to be intentional as much as you can be intentional. So the point is, there's this idea of tax home. So where is your tax home? And when you're transitioning between countries, in particular, in that year of the actual transition, you potentially have two countries that are interested in your facts and circumstances, and you might have to file two tax returns. Sort of a closing, if you are in fact closing out residency in the one and opening up residency in the other, then you're going to have, two tax returns that are going to match up that way. There's another, there is the possibility that you might maintain residency in both countries. It's very possible. And in which case, again, you're going to have two tax returns, only in this case, you're going to have them constantly. And depending on the rules of the two different countries, you may have a treaty between those two countries, where we have what we call tiebreaker rules as to which country gets to tax what revenue. And that's where it gets more complicated, hypothetically. But again, this is again why we have to go up to 30,000 feet and say, well, what are we really trying to do here? And that is why, remember I was talking about, do you rent or not rent? It really comes down to that big picture of, again, we have to kind of go up and say, what are we really trying to achieve? How do we stay on track long term? And what's the tax impact going to be? So it's really like, what's the tax impact on my plan? And the transition plan is going to figure that out. And then what's going to happen is you'll kind of normalize on the other end, if that makes sense. So what you're really doing, if you think of it this way, is I have my plan, whether it's written or not, you've done stuff, right? And that is effectively your plan. If you do nothing, that is pretty much a plan, right? Does that make sense? Like you just continue at the status quo. We can project that out into the future and say what your future would look like. And then we have this sort of situation in at the end of 12 months, which is, again, the same idea. We can project that forward. Well, what we have the opportunity to build is this transition plan, if that makes sense. Yeah. So one is the tax filter, and is really trying to understand what is the impact of the move on the tax situation. And then all of that is going to have a big impact on the cash design, if you think about it. So yes, there is cost of living, but you're going to have cost of living, again, in potentially, if you're still resident in country one, we've got to know what I like to call the running costs. What are the running costs of that life over in that country? And we'll just keep it simple and say we're still resident there. And then what's it going to cost in country B as well? And here's the thing that I feel like is another little bit of a trap, is the cost of living indexes they're nice to be able to have a high level understanding of how one jurisdiction might be different from another, but they are not a planning tool, ever. Unfortunately, I feel like in the blogs, sometimes you see people are like, oh, I just use the cost of living comparisons. And that is why people get caught. You use a cost of living comparison between two countries and you think, all I did was I took my number in country A and I used the cost of living comparison and I extrapolated that, did the multiplier, and that became my new spending number for country B. But that is not based in your reality. A cost of living index is just a basket of goods. The end. If you don't live that basket of goods, which most people don't, you're not going to have that same. In other words, not apples and apples, right? It's just an indication. So usually, if at all possible, you're trying to connect with other people on the ground. You yourself hopefully have gone for some kind of what I like to call an exploratory expedition. And the whole purpose of that is to really get the numbers. I have a client who we're working through a transition plan right now. Actually, they're taking 12 months to figure out their actual transition plan. And they are going in a few months. And we've got their spending plan figured out based on where they live right now. And then they've got this new allocation to exploratory expeditions. So they're physically going. Their homework is to go into Airbnbs, look at rents, look at properties if they might buy. They probably won't buy in the beginning based on their overall plan. But the point is that they are supposed to live, like they're actually living there. Go to the grocery stores, and they're supposed to move around in that one country. They're going to move to about 3 or 4 different areas, localized areas, to get a feel for if the cost of living is different. So they really are themselves tracking what they spend over there, getting an idea of realistically how often might they go out, how much does that cost. And I know it sounds like a lot of detail, but this is like an investment, and it's paying dividends because you're not getting caught. The more clear you can be, the better off you are.
Yeah, this is fantastic. advice goes, because I haven't heard in any of the blogs about like when you go to for a go-see visit. Yeah, it's like, yes, you're checking out schools and houses and thinking about the transition from an emotional point, a lifestyle point of view, but are you thinking about it from a financial point of view? Like really understand the figures and sort of like, does it add up for your short term as well as your long term life plan? And sometimes you might not have the time to really think about it. Sometimes your job just says, we need you there in a month, and you don't have time to really sort of like sit down and process and think like, is this a good move for us? But I think it's so worthwhile. Like if you've got the opportunity to have a go-see visit that you need to sort of like check, get a Starling card or a Monzo card, something like that, where you've got the transfer fees are included, are free on those. So you are on Starling anyway. And then you can kind of compare a bit more apples with apples about how much you spend in a week or two in your new country versus your old one.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And can actually have a more realistic idea of how that would project long term.
Yeah, it is huge, because then, you know, the other things that are going to come in are the healthcare costs is going to, you know, it's all those, and you're getting to your point about school, you know, what is the schooling, what are the schooling options? Because in a corporate relocation, you know, obviously the employer is going to give you what they can, but they may not have they may not have all that information. And then also they don't know who you are. They don't know your preferences. And also I feel like personally, if it was me, I would ask what the resources are that are available to me to use, but I'm not going to ask my employer to tell me how to live my life. I mean, you know, I'm there to work for them and to do, you know, carry out the task at hand, to do a great job, to advance the career in, you know, and advance my career in sort of repayment of the good work that I do. But at the same time, you know, your employer is not going to be responsible for your happiness, right? And we all are responsible for our own happiness. And so we have got to know, what is the cost of our, you know, what does it cost to carry out what's important to me? If we need to have a gym membership, and I have to drive to get to it, you know, then what, you know, it's all these little things. And I think the challenge too is you have the cultural things are just possibly done very differently. And until you really have experienced it, you really in some ways can't 100% plan for it, which is why I'm saying we can't do absolutely everything before we go, but we can look at these core essentials. And healthcare, so healthcare is going to come into that. That's also a question in the employee benefits. Obviously, if you're self-employed and you're completely driving this yourself, these are all the same. They're the same issues. It's just how it's going to play out is a little bit different. You're just completely in control, right? And you're deciding if you are keeping your business in, say, country A and you're just visiting, or am I actually incorporating in country B, which is going to have an entirely different set of facts and circumstances. And all of this stuff is going to pivot accordingly. So again, like healthcare costs, well, maybe that's an expense, a business expense. Whereas for the employee, it may be a deduction out of pay. And then they have to decide whether they're covering their family or not. And that kind of segues a little bit to protect the plan. So the main thing with cash design is what I'm calling, it's literally that you're designing the cash flow, right? It's not how much am I earning, ergo I can spend that much. It's like, no. I don't even like to consider the income. The assignment when I give it to clients is figure out the numbers, the expenses first. And we have, and actually in my book, we talk about it as a spending plan. We have a thing called a money inventory worksheet. And that's the point of it. It doesn't even bring income in until you've run through the money inventory. So you run that first. It's just to get a whole lot of clarity. So once that's done, you start thinking through the ideas of protect the plan. The key points are, we like to have an emergency fund, which you've probably heard of before. And the whole point of that is, you know, the emergence is exactly what it sounds like, but it's this contingency fund surplus, and in a relocation, it's going to have to fill in the gap of where we weren't 100% clear. But all of a sudden, we got a lot of clarity, and maybe we didn't have enough money set aside for something. And it really just gives us that opportunity to be flexible. So how much? It's really as much as you can have. I mean, obviously, we like to, before you're relocating, we want to, usually financial planners are going to say you should have some kind of basic savings. And as much as I'm not really a fan of rules of thumb, you are definitely looking at probably at least 3 months basic living expenses. Basic living expenses is exactly what it sounds like. It's not vacations, right? You're not covering that kind of money. But nonetheless, you can use it for however you want, and then you just have to find a way to replenish it. So you've got to have your emergency fund. From an estate planning point of view, remember we talked about the tax filter in residency. There's another concept called domicile, and that comes into estate planning. So it gets a little more complicated, but the point is to kind of decide, this again is why the long-term plan view, because domicile goes to intent. Domicile is like, where is your real home? Just the word home is just one of those words, right?
Mean for people who might be like, what does that even mean? Like for me, it's like, where, yeah, exactly what you said, like, where is home?
Yeah.
Like, where are you going to be at the end of your life?
Right. Exactly. It goes to intent. So it's this idea of, I mean, you could, it's like, where do you see home? Like legally. So, because you can have a tax home and a domicile be different. So in other words, you could initially, so for me, let's use me as an example. Initially, I was resident in the United States, and so I would be domiciled in the United States because until I had the intent to move abroad. Now I have the intent to move abroad, then there's this question for me in particular, because I'm marrying a local, and now I have an immigration status that is different than expat, right? So and technically speaking, for me, there's a 10-year, for Bermuda in particular, you have to look at the country rule that you're dealing with, and again, your circumstance, but let's use me. So I came into Bermuda initially as an expat. Yes, I'm married to a local, but I still had no rights until 10 years of marriage. And so my immigration status couldn't really change until at least 10 years of marriage, not 100%. But my domicile was probably still the United States until, I would make a complete, I would have to say in a will, which is where I'm getting to, that I basically want to talk about my life based in Bermuda. And maybe if I've been intentional about not having any ownership of anything in the United States, then it's pretty clear my domicile is now Bermuda. My intent is to stay here and not go back to the US. It wouldn't be as clear unless you are clear. I know that sounds weird, but it's not something that is super easy to just say, well, if you do X or Y or Z, then your domicile changes. It's much more subjective in many ways. But the point that I want to get across here is that if you've gone through the paperwork in, say, country A, or you have a will that's covering worldwide assets or not, that's another question. It's like, what does it actually say? And or you have your healthcare directive in case of you need somebody to make medical decisions for you if you cannot. Yeah, it can include do not resuscitate, things like that. They have different names, but it's generally a healthcare power of attorney, that kind of thing. So you would have 3 documents. You might have a healthcare power of attorney. You might have a regular sort of enduring power of attorney, which means financially somebody else can do something for you if you cannot. And then you have your will, which is going to pass your assets on to other people because you cannot do that. And all those documents may need to be reviewed because they may not be valid, which is the point I'm really getting to, is they may not be valid in that other jurisdiction. You have to decide. But again, it's coming back to domicile and intent. And some of those documents, if you intend to not be fully resident, how can I put it? You have to be kind of careful if you're going to straddle the two countries and or try to say you're non-resident in one, and then you have like assets in there. So that's again where it gets a little bit complicated. So this is why I'm saying it's the essentials really are the tax, because that's also filtering through everything, cash flow, because that is where everything is driving through, and then what I'm calling protect the plan, the healthcare and your will, your powers of attorney, and how does that have to shift. After that, the rest of it is mostly tactics, because you can have strategy in all those areas, or those areas are all going to intertwine a lot. What you do in one area is going to have an impact to another area, especially all filtering back to immigration status, if you think about it, and domicile.
And I think it's interesting that you bring up about wills. I know sort of like when my father died, sort of like the headache we had with wills, because it was written in English law, but he died in Scotland. And even though it's all UK, they're completely different. And it took 3 years to get it sorted out. And it's like, that's a headache that could be avoided. And cost, like the amount of it cost as well, and like the tax issues and stuff, that it cost like thousands to sort out, and it was unnecessary.
It does. And you know, one of the other points is, and it's just easily overlooked, is when you're talking to lawyers, some lawyers are very good at planning, and some are just don't do it. Really, you know, they just, most everybody will draft for sure. That's what you're paying them for. But they are going to do their drafting based on what they know in their local jurisdiction as well. Unless, of course, you've hired somebody that has like multiple offices or an international law firm. So you have to also know that you can have, one of the questions we usually ask is whether or not you have one will that is going to cover worldwide assets, or whether we're going to have multiple wills. So one will in different jurisdictions covering those assets in those different, or people in those different countries. And I will, you know, my husband and I are buying an apartment in Dublin, and we've actually talked about that. So previously we've had a will that covered worldwide assets, and now I'm changing it. So that we are going to have one will that covers only the assets in Ireland, and then we'll have another will that we have to make sure that that our attorney knows to have the language such that it's not revoking the other will. That's number one. And number two, it's keeping your own, you have to kind of keep what you want straight before you go into, well, pretty much any professional, unless they can help you figure out what that is. But particularly in law, because the word, they're going to say, you're probably going to just give you a questionnaire and say, what do you want? You're just trying to think, how fast can I get through this thing? But at the end of the day, there really does need to, you start again with that plan. You know, I have to keep coming back to this long-term plan, because you're thinking, what do we really want to have happen with these assets? Who are they going to? Why are we separating them out? It's usually because of either laws, or because the other thing that can happen is lawyers will often tell you, they've told me, that you can, some certain countries, they'll let you what they call reseal a will in a different country. So this is probably what you might have experienced with your father. So, but I find personally that can be very expensive, because whereas if you had maybe 3 different wills that were all done properly, maybe we didn't have to reseal. In other words, you're not taking the will that's of country A and going into country B and saying, here you go, this is, and we have to make, and then you've got to run through the process to make sure that it's valid and people know how to use it and whatever. So there's 2 parts. There's the what do you want to have happen, and then there's just the administrative realities, practicalities of it, if that makes sense. So that's planning. You know, we have to think big picture. What do we want? What's the paper that we need to make this work? And then let's think about the practicalities. And then once we've thought that through, we kind of go back up to 30,000 feet and we go, right, okay, update the plan. That's almost the thinking process, which is why all this is important.
And I think it's really important that we're speaking about this because I know a lot of us, especially as women, we tend to sort of like pass the buck with a lot with the financial side of things and the legal side of things to our partners, our husbands, who are maybe getting that more of that support from their companies, or the contracts are through their companies anyway. So you kind of remove yourself with that and sort of like focus on supporting the kids or the family and transition. And it's like it's really important to make sure that your finances are tight as well, and that you're protected, because I've seen things go very horribly wrong for people, and sort of like divorces happen and it becomes a complete nightmare. So it's like taking full ownership and charge of your finances and legal aspects, and not just burying your head in the sand, is really important.
Yeah.
And getting in touch with experts like Jennifer would, at the very beginning, before even thinking about getting on that plane, just so that you have a clear plan of what to expect, and to sort of like have that plan for all the eventualities, and so that you don't end up with a disaster that you hadn't planned for.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you saying that. One of the easy ways to stay involved or get involved is to, as much as, we as women, we really don't need anything more to do on our plate, but sometimes it's a nice entry point to the finances, is to kind of raise your hand and say, I'm happy to be the organizer of the data. Because I find one of the biggest challenges, aside from these three sort of key essential areas, you have to find that you're going to know where your paper is, right? And it's got to be stored somewhere that you can access it. So one of the other tips that I would like to offer, in particular to women, is offer to, create a secure location, virtual location, like, I don't know if Dropbox, or I don't know if Citrix, we use ShareFile Corporate, but Citrix uses that. I don't know if they have an individual plan, but something, cloud-based that is safe. And when I say safe, I mean, technology safe. You've got it backed up somewhere, maybe on a hard drive even, but is to be the organizer of the data. So it's like making sure that you know where all these documents are, all the health insurance policies, the life insurance policies, pay stubs. I mean, I personally like to have it organized in folders by year. And I like statements. We want bank statements saved, even though there's a lot of data that can be downloaded into apps and that kind of thing. At the end of the day, we still need the hard evidence, so to speak, of everything. And I find with the ladies in particular, that's one way to keep the power equal or equitable, in different ways, because information, even if you don't feel comfortable being a fully involved, even though I would advocate to be as much involved as you can at least be the organizer of the data. Because I find there are a lot of women who want to get involved later, but then they don't know where any of the paperwork is. And let's be honest, in many cases, the guys don't know where it is either. They think they have it all under control, and they're like, and they're not going to tell you that they don't, because they're worried usually. If some maybe have ulterior motives, but majority, literally just don't have it organized like that, and they're just not that type. And a lot of the guys just don't like organizing. So we have the nest. We can organize our nest, and so I feel like that's just an easy place to get started. And once you kind of start maintaining it, you just start filing everything away, and now you have to be involved in many ways. Like, things have to go through you. So even if you don't get your name on certain bank accounts to get started, it doesn't mean that you can't find a way to still have information.
Yeah, and because if you don't have that information to have that broad overview of knowing exactly what you have and what assets and sort of like, and the projection of where you want to end up, how can you make informed decisions about where you want to be in your life together? 10, 20, 30 years down the road if you don't have all the facts.
Yeah. Agreed. And, I find, honestly, working with couples for, forever, for my entire career, I have found that if anything started breaking down, it was not necessarily, it wasn't always the money, but sometimes, that didn't help anything. And it really is about keeping the channels of communication open. And I also feel like, one of the things that we have Patterson Partners and we have Cross-Border Living, and under Cross-Border Living, we created a quiz called Your Money Code Quiz, or that's the URL. But anyway, it's called What's Your Money Code? And the reason we did it was actually for couples, for the main reason that it's interesting that we all have these certain tendencies, and we find some people are more prone to being interested in planning, and some people are not. Not to say that one's better or not at it. It's just saying that that's just a tendency. And so we just recognize that that's true. And we're not saying it's wrong. It's just saying it is what it is. But if you can have a knowledge about, whether you're one of those people who is more interested in making sure that the family being in a support role, and that's how you see yourself, and that's your identity, and that's great. But know that there's a shadow side to knowing that you are potentially, if you won't stay involved and make sure that you are aware of things, then if you're married to somebody who's control based, they will just naturally plan for you. And if you don't say anything, they're just going to take that as given. And they're not doing it necessarily in the beginning, in a healthy situation. They're not being, they're not in their own shadow. They're not trying to just force their way. It really is that they just are a planner. They're like, well, you didn't say no, you said X, and so I took that as X, and then I went forward. And you said you didn't really, you know what I mean? You can see how that can play out in couples.
Yeah, so I went.
So we have happily found that we've been able to strike up really good conversations between couples to help them understand, number one, who they are and just kind of how they show up, and not to say that it's right or wrong. It's just to say that it is. And now, what is my role? And then you can also just know if you're in a couple situation that you go, oh, this is how my spouse is wired, and we know that our dominant approach is probably not going to change. And I forget who said it. I think it's a psychologist, but how you do anything is how you do everything. So if somebody is control-based, they're going to be control-based in money. And that means that they're more planner-oriented. They might be a CEO type, and they're just going to take charge. And if you're if you're the person who likes to go along, and you don't want to be the take charge person, well, then that's fine. But just know that take charge, if you're matched up with a take charge person, and that might have been an initial attraction, yin yang kind of thing, that know that there can become a power imbalance if you kind of play that forward, if we aren't aware of it. So I just offer that.
And it's, I love how we've diverged a little bit, because I think this is really important, and because at the beginning, sort of the finances and things can just feel overwhelming to a lot of people. And it actually comes down to relationships as well, and a lot more of the fundamental things about how you want your life to be, and you have control over that. And sort of you don't have to just go along with the flow. You can take charge and plan in advance and design the life that you want to live, with taking sort of certain steps. It's just well, I want you set yourself a goal of I want to save X amount of money before so I can then go traveling around the world or whatever it is. Then you put the steps in place to be able to do that. It's I want to save X amount to send my kid to college. You need to create a plan to enable you to do that. And life comes in the way, it changes, and circumstances changes along the way, but then you just course correct, and it's it's about communication with the people around you, of making sure that you know where all the data is, that you've both clear on what the plan is and how you are planning to get to the end goal, what our goals are aligned for a
Yes.
start, and that your plan, like you're both on the same page with the plan. Because if you've got different ideas about what your goal is at the end, then you're going to end up in conflict, because it's like, well, I thought I was doing plan A, but you're doing plan C.
Sure.
And you need to sort of like be aligned. So I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap up. So is there any like final thoughts that you want to kind of share with us?
I think just really to reiterate what you just said, which is that, you know, I actually come from the belief that we're all in absolute control, and our money, and which is great. The thing about money is it doesn't have to control us at all. It's actually just a concept. If you think about it, money, we make it tangible. Back in the day, it actually was represented by gold or whatever actual physicality. But now in the day and age, we even now have Bitcoin, and the virtual currencies are coming into play. So it's really just a concept, right? And so money itself is nothing other than a tool. And planning is our power tool, if you will, to tell money what to do so that it supports our life. And that if you reinforce that into like your entire being, then it's reinforcing this idea that we're all absolutely in control. And really planning is our tool, and money is just another tool, really, at the end of the day. So it's exciting, you know. It doesn't have to be scary. In fact, I feel like the more that you plan, the less scary it is. I hear a lot of people think that they can't plan because they don't have certainty. And I feel like that's maybe a disservice that the industry has given everyone. Because yes, you go to somebody, an expert, and they're like, what do you want? You know, we're trying to pin you down. And they'll say, well, we can't produce a plan if you don't know what you want. Well, I think we totally can, because we'll know, because we have to start where you are. And we can boil down to what the essentials, you've heard about the essentials that I've kind of talked about. But what happens too is you also know what you don't want. So using those, you can start. And even if you just start with, this is what I don't want, there's a lot of clarity there. And so you can absolutely get started. There's really nothing stopping. You don't have to have perfect clarity of then even the next 3 years. You can know what's going to happen. I would say, you know, just try to plan out at least a year, but keep again the context of those milestones. And you'll be way further ahead of anybody else who is not planning at all. But you'll be way more successful. So.
And those milestones can be anything. It's like, oh, by the time your child sort of like starts secondary school, you want to be in this kind of financial position, or before you.
Yeah, you know, it can even be as simple as, you know, one of the tips actually that I personally love this exercise is I don't have a name for it, but if you write down sort of you draw a circle and you put like your name in the middle of it, and then almost like I forget what the type of diagram, and you sort of draw off like a sun, and then like a mind map kind of thing, and then you draw the other circles of like, who are my immediate family members. And then the one thing that's kind of fun to do is just add like you now and 10 years, you know, like, sorry, your age now. And then the age of everybody kind of in your immediate circle, including if you want to put friends or whatnot. And then like add 10 years to that and add 20 years to that. And that's basically your milestones. So you start thinking, oh my gosh, my 5-year-old is going to be 15. What's going on in 10 years? And what's life going to look like when my child is 15? Maybe your parents are like pushing 80. What's going on with them, or him or her, you know, or anybody like that. And it starts putting a lot of perspective in. And so you don't have to know 100% where you might be, right? But you might start thinking through, again, with the kids, or even like in that example, your 5-year-old who's now 15, you think, oh, what are we thinking about for school? It could just be school. Do you know what I mean? You just have that, you're just like, I know that we're committed to private school. In fact, we were thinking international school. What do we have to be doing?
Yeah.
It's asking the question. And that's what the point of those milestones are, is just to keep track. Because obviously, you know, the lifestyle, you can get caught up in that lifestyle, you get caught up in the deadlines, we get caught up in every day to day that, you know, crises, everything is happening. And life can just suddenly disappear. You know, we all know that. It's like 2 years have gone by and you think, oh my gosh. And there's a lot of people I know that I've met socially who have said, you know, we're on that contract and then that contract renewed, and they can only see to the contract renewal. But I'm trying to say you've got to look up and look out, because otherwise you will find yourself at the point when your child is 15 and you're worrying about university, and you're like, wow, we didn't save a dime for it, right? What are we going to do now? Or, you know, a parent's sick and you don't know what you want to do. So it's not trying to say that you'll have the absolute map for that, but it's just putting it down, having that perspective. And that's what I mean by a milestone, is it's what clarity do we have that around that one thing, this very lifestyle. And if you have a whole lot of children who are female and you believe in your culture that you're throwing big weddings, you know, and they're all going to be sort of 2 years apart, hypothetically, then we want to be prepared for that, you know. So I know I had to do that with my kids are 3.5 years apart. So that put them 4 school years apart. But that meant that there was 1 year, I remember mapping this out for us, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have 2 of them in university at the same time. And I knew, you know, sort of 10 plus years ago that we were going to be moving toward that. And, you know, we're looking at cash outlay of $100,000 or whatever currency plus. So we always kept that kind of around as one of our key milestones. Otherwise, it would never have been hit.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think just to sum up, it's like, yeah, make sure you know the data, get those milestones mapped out so that you've got that overview of where you want, what you need, so you can now plan in advance of what you need to set up to get there, and get advice about how to achieve those milestones, what you can do with what you've currently got, because it's a lot easier to save, like for your kids' college, for example, like when they're a baby, than when like 2 years before they go away to college. It's going to be
for sure
a lot more stressful. So take off that stress of yourself and sort of like, and just have that kind of broad overview so that you can kind of check in with that as time goes on.
Exactly. And then just let that and then let guide you through your transition plan.
Exactly. So I think those 3 critical things to be aware of, like the tax filters of where you are going to be residing or domicile and how those interact, the cash design, and sort of like, so yeah, how are you going to manage that cash, and then how are you going to protect that plan, what contingencies are you going to have in place when things go wrong, so, and how do you protect that plan so that you don't end up in trouble down the line. So I think there's amazing tips. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So where can people find you and get in touch?
Yeah, awesome. The easiest place is to go to crossborderliving.com. And we have some downloads there. You have email if you want to be in touch with me. And then you can also get to my book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble through that website.
Fantastic. We'll pop all the links in the comments below so you can check those out. So thank you so much again, Jennifer, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful, and hope everybody found some value in our chat today.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this chat today. If you have any questions or any comments, please pop them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Easy to get started. Download the app today and join our community to feel at home anywhere.